Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentations, and I'm going to present to you someone who's been to our council meetings for a couple of years, thank goodness, and has been a huge asset to the fire community. This is John Pendergrast. John Pendergrast, a native of Central Florida, is lead meteorologist with the National Weather Service, Melbourne, Florida, serving East Central Florida since 1998. And we're going to need these. We're going to need these. In addition to forecast and warning services, John is the fire weather program leader at Melbourne and has been to over 20 national fires in the role of incident meteorologist since 2006. And more recently as an air quality resource advisor. John attended Florida State University and has a BS in meteorology. And one last thing, John, since this is being, virtual, I know some of us are used to moving about and accustomed to that, but we have to stay right here because they can't hear us. It's okay if they can't see us, but they need to hear us. Thank you for coming. Over to you.
Stand by just a moment. We only have one microphone, so it takes a moment to set. Well, thanks for the committee and for Sammy and the folks involved to finally put on a meeting. The calendar year is drawing to a close. And we, of course, had some problems with hurricanes getting in the way, but that's Florida for you. So, yeah, thanks everybody for both attending virtually and being here in person. It's nice for me. I'm really glad to be back in person after a several-year hiatus due to COVID and other reasons, but it's nice to be back. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So I have time here today for the presentation to talk about several major topics. So the major ones are going to be, I'm going to start out with smoke and air quality. We're going to talk about the current overlying conditions around East Central Florida in particular, as we set up for the dry season. And then lastly, I'm going to give you an outlook for the upcoming dry season. The first thing I want to talk about related to smoke is something that we don't really think about too much as far as our situational awareness and how we stand compared to other parts of the country as far as population density. So I took this little snippet of a map off of the World Population Review website. And this is as of 2022, just looking at the areas of the country, especially east of the Mississippi River, where there's lots of people dwell. And of course, our attention focuses on the Northeast Corridor, lots of people up there, lots of population density. And then down here in Florida, which we all know we're adding hundreds of people daily to our general population along the state. So just, if you've never considered this before, take a mental guess as where Florida stands on that list in the entire United States. Where do you think we are on the list of population density in the US? How many people think that it's in the top 3 of the whole United States? Okay. How about the top 5 of the United States? And top 10? Does anybody think that we're outside of the top 10 as far as population density? Okay, for you folks that are online virtually, we're getting a lot of head shakes and nobody's raising their hand as far as top 10. So Florida actually stands 8th in the United States as far as population density. Probably not a huge surprise, but if you look at the population overall, we're number 3. So we passed New York a couple of years ago as far as population, and we're probably going to always stay ahead of New York because they're all coming down here. It seems like. So how many of these states on this list have active prescribed burning programs ahead of Florida? None. There's nobody. So that shows you where we're at. We are a very successful state as far as the openness of prescribed burning. And we have a very successful program despite the population density, which is just awesome in my opinion. So just tunneling it down a little bit closer to the state of Florida, probably not a big surprise that the bulk of the population lives amongst the coastal areas of the state. And that's true for certainly the entire East Coast along the I-95 corridor, as well as the Gulf side. Now think about that as burners. How does that affect us as far as especially smoke movement? Of course, a lot of our open tracts of land tend to be concentrated on the interior portions away from the coast where a lot of prescribed burning does take place. So that smoke could eventually affect anybody that rings those areas with the heavier population, something that we obviously have to consider and keep in mind. So the question I ask you is that with this population ringing us, the open tracts of land, how are we able to successfully prescribe burn? We can still do it, which is amazing. And that's because Florida, the way that it's structured is we're surrounded by water. Thank God we're surrounded by water because that allows for generally good dispersion of the air on most days. The image that you see on the right there shows typically what can happen year round is the development of onshore breezes. If we get any kind of heating of the surface of the land, we're going to get an onshore breeze. And that's true even in the month of January, December, in the winter months, because of our latitude, the decent surface heating that we can get. We get good circulation, good dispersion, helps to mix the smoke out. And in general, a lot of that population that I showed you earlier on that slide on the coast is going to get that good air coming in off the bodies of water to help mitigate things. So that's really the reason we can do it, is because of our situation with the water surrounding us. So, of course, we all know that fires are nasty. They produce a lot of A, B, C, D letter emissions from the fire. A lot of these are gases, the CO2, the CO. The one thing that we want to concentrate on for this presentation is the particulate matter that comes off of prescribed burning. The actual matter that has mass that can potentially go into our airways, the population's airways, and affect folks to some degree. So let's take a look at the effects of that particulate matter. I have here a little diagram just kind of showing the relative sizes of things as far as how they relate. And of course, the largest object here is the human hair, which is roughly about 50 to 70 microns across. Just as an FYI, a cloth mask is generally about the same measurement. So it's only able to filter out particulates on the larger scale of things. And these smaller things that I'm going to talk about, especially the PM 2.5, which is 2.5 microns, can easily get through a cloth mask. So looking at the relative sizes of things here, we have a picture of some beach sand, which is give or take about 90 microns. It's a larger object. But the 2.5, if you just look at that, how small that is on the diagram here, we have the PM10, which is also a smoke particulate matter. It's a larger substance, a larger substance with mass. It's 1/5 of the size of a human hair, the blue dot that you see there. The thing that's most concerning as far as effects on human health and the human population is the 2.5 micron, which is 1/5 of the the PM10. So we're talking about very tiny things here, approximately 1/20th the size of a human hair. The reason why we're concerned about the PM10 and especially the PM 2.5 is its ability to penetrate into the airways. The general expectation is that PM10 can go deep into the trachea and to the airway, but the PM 2.5 has the ability, because of its size, to penetrate deep into the lungs. On this example here, the 2.5, of course, is the small particles that can go well into the airway and go well into the inner parts of your lung sac, your breathing sac, and affect directly your ability to process oxygen. So it's the 2.5 that we're most concerned with, and it's obviously a common particulate matter that comes off a prescribed fire. Now, not only the general population has issues with breathing particulate matter, but we're most concentrated on the sensitive populations, the folks that have pre-existing conditions like asthma, lung disease, of course, underlying cardiovascular. All of these types of disorders are making people more susceptible to the breathing of particulate matter associated with smoke. And as far as even larger populations, we have special wording for underage children and older folks, as they tend to be in general more susceptible as a population group, even if they don't have asthma or cardiovascular conditions in general. Of course, the firefighting folks come under this as they are, of course, outdoor workers that are involved in the operations associated with particulate matter. So the Environmental Protection Agency of the US, they have an air quality index chart that most of you have probably seen before. It's actually a simplified chart that is in increments of 50 up through the lower levels. Florida is blessed with good air quality virtually every day of the year. There's only a few days where we have issues that go into the yellow or the moderate as far as air quality. Those tend to be during the winter months where we have a little bit less movement, a little bit less mixing of air on some days. Now, once you go into the mountainous regions, say in the Rockies and more populated urban corridors, they can have days where moderate to unhealthy for sensitive groups on many days. So we're talking yellow to orange air for days on end. And certainly if you add wildfires into the mix, it can really be a public issue as far as the air quality. This is a map that probably a lot of you have seen. This is a HRR smoke. So it's a model smoke depiction using existing wildfires and the movement of smoke. The reason why I have the word deceiving at the top of the map is because this chart is widely misread as far as a forecast element. For example, if you look at the key on the bottom of the chart, you'll notice that the first colors start being introduced with the concentrations below 10 micrograms, which 10 micrograms is really not a big deal as far as smoke or particulate matter. You really need to get up into the oranges to really be a problem, especially when you're talking long-term exposure. So the only place on this map that really has the say the yellows, oranges, and reds are the areas more proximate to the wildfires over the west. This is an image back from September of this year, just when we had some active fires occurring over the Intermountain region. But of course, this is a big deal because you're seeing a large area, like for example, Idaho. Most of the state is under the yellow to red as far as particulate matter. So it was certainly an issue for that population during this time of period, especially for long-term effects, say 24 hours or greater of exposure. Now, the way that smoke and air pollution is handled in the state of Florida is it's not administered by the EPA, but there's a partnership with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the EPA, where the Florida DEP does the heavy lifting as far as assessing smoke levels and particulate levels around the state. These are the field offices on the map here. And of course, most of our area is at the Orlando location, which covers a big chunk of East Central Florida. There's also an office in the Hillsborough County, which covers the other portion of Central Florida. But this is where the air quality standards are administered throughout the state, is through the Florida DEP. So this is an example. If you look at the image that's on the left-hand side, the spatial air quality system that is administered by Florida DEP, where they have permanent monitoring sites set up at numerous locations around the peninsula. Of course, not a big surprise looking at this specific snapshot that everybody was green for the day or in the good air quality. Now, there have been some efforts recently, say in the last 5 years, of citizen monitoring networks that are being established. And this is called the Purple Air Network. The Purple Air is a private company that produces a high quality air quality sensor that citizens can purchase individually for their homes or businesses. They can establish them at their location, and it becomes part of an observing network. So it's, in other words, it's a crowdsourced or citizen monitoring network. This is a recommended item, especially if you have someone susceptible to air quality that's in your home or your business. You can easily set up a monitoring network at your location to monitor the air quality for their purposes, and also pipe that information into the monitoring network, which is a national monitoring network. You tend to see most of these located out in the Western US, and the Purple Air sensors are actually such high quality that the federal government does use them as part of their cache and wildfire monitoring efforts. in the west. So it is a good sensor. Another cool thing is the Florida 511 network as far as monitoring smoke and fog. If you've looked at this network in the last 12 months, they've actually added streaming cameras to the network in a lot of locations. So if you're not aware of that, I would suggest going to the fl511.com, and you can actually look at streaming cameras. We use this a lot in our operations area at our office for fog, as well as smoke monitoring. Really comes in handy. For those of you who are interested in advancing your education as prescribed burners, there's actually a course as part of the NWCG. It's called the RX 410. It's the smoke management course for prescribed burners. And this course was actually held a couple of years ago down in the Disney Wilderness Preserve, was the last time that it was in this area. And Zach actually facilitated that course at the preserve. I'm not sure what the future intentions are, but there may be some opportunities, at least in a nearby state or even in Florida, if you're interested in going to advancing your education as a prescribed burner. I do know that this course is very helpful for folks that really have smoke mitigation as part of their prescription, or it's a really big deal for you as a burner. So just keep that in mind. It's the RX 410. All right. So we had this presentation was all set to go right about October, and then we had a hurricane get in the way. It affected me as well because I had my show ready to go as far as the weather conditions and what was happening out there through the summer months. And I had to do a reconfiguration completely based upon these hurricanes. So we had, of course, Ian, which came ashore down at the Sanibel area as a Category 4 and moved across the central part of the state. They actually crisscrossed just south of here, both of the systems. Nicole was such an unusual system, coming ashore as a low-end Category 1, just south of my house, actually, down in Indian River County. But that really added to the rainfall. Wasn't a big surprise. The St. Johns Basin is still in flood in northern Lake County from this. So it's pretty amazing to have flood conditions along the river basins in the month of December. But they really laid down a lot of rain. And looking at the rainfall specifics, this was what occurred on the left during Hurricane Ian. For locations along and just east of Interstate 4, received generally the highest amounts. If you look at this closer, there was some rain amounts of 12 to 14 inches that occurred roughly from the South Tampa Bay area all the way east of the I-4 corridor up into Volusia County. So lots of rain in just about a 2-day period for much of Central Florida, especially the I-4 corridor. Nicole on the right was not nearly as heavy as a rain producer. It moved ashore quicker. Well, kind of was out of here a little bit faster. But it was interesting to note, if you look at the map, that the high rainfall bullseyes were very similar to what occurred with Ian, especially east of the I-4 corridor, where there was, about, looks like 3 to 5 inches of rain was fairly common in eastern Orange County, parts of Seminole. And that's also centered right along the St. Johns Basin. So the St. Johns Basin received much of that rainfall, and we're still seeing the effects of that along the basin, especially areas north of the Cocoa forecast point as you get up into Volusia and Seminole counties. And it actually did turn out that this past autumn was the wettest on record for the Orlando-Sanford area. The Orlando rainfall records go back 130 years, so nothing to sneeze at. And we had the highest rainfall for the autumn season for 130 years at Orlando, which is pretty amazing. And Sanford as well had a record. Their record of period only goes back to 1948, but over 25 inches of rain just in the autumn, which is typically getting into our more drier time of year, was pretty amazing. So right before our talk was supposed to have happened at the end of summer, the image on the left showed kind of where we stood before the hurricanes made their landfall. We actually had an abnormally dry area from about Brevard County and Osceola County down south to Metro Miami at the end of summer. Of course, when Ian made landfall, that kind of put a damper on that and changed things. And the image on the right here is the most recent image showing that the Panhandle of Florida is already in drought conditions. A D2 drought was being assessed for much of the Florida Panhandle and even going into parts of the Southeast. But the bulk of the peninsula is back to normal as far as overall long-term rainfall. So no perceptible drought is where we stand right now. as far as the peninsula of Florida. So let's look ahead now, what we're expecting for the remainder of the dry season. I always like to show this one slide for folks that haven't seen presentations in the past, but the El Nino seasonal outlook, El Nino / La Nina, that we look at over the tropical Pacific is a large component of the seasonal rain and temperature forecast that we make for the state of Florida during the dry months, during the winter months. This is a table showing what it's been like over the last 12 years, looking at the assessments of El Nino and La Nina. And if you look at the bottom there, ever since about mid-2020, we have been in a diagnosed La Nina state. So when you see the blue colors going across in the chart and then going down into 21 and 2022, there's been an assessed La Nina across the tropical Pacific going for 3 years almost now, which is really unusual. And we're still in that state right now. It's interesting to note that all the assessment regions where it is assessed over the tropical Pacific are still in a La Nina state. So minus water temperatures that you see on the left there, the minus 0.9, minus 1. These are all the assessment boxes where the ocean temperatures are being assessed, still in La Nina. So statistical dynamical model predictions going forward through the remainder of winter shows that the state is going to migrate closer to neutral, though, as we go through the winter months. So the curve basically starts right on the left of the chart there where you have the black line. And then looking at the spread in the model prediction, the spread is taking us back closer to the horizontal black line, which is neutral La Nina conditions. And that's supposed to happen roughly about May, June is when it's expected to get back into that. So the ENSO status is that we're still in a La Nina advisory over the tropical Pacific Ocean. So La Nina is present. Expected to continue into winter with a 71% chance of ENSO neutral conditions by the February to April timeframe. So playing that forward into the forecast for the CONUS as far as temperature and precipitation. This is the outlook for January through March, showing that in the box on the top that the southeastern U.S. is expected to be in above normal temperatures. That's the prediction that's always made when there's a La Nina in place, is above normal temperatures, especially for the southern tier of the continental U.S. and below normal rainfall as well for a big chunk. The image on the right, we're still anticipating below normal rainfall for the bulk of the southern tier of the U.S. And the reason is because the jet stream, which tends to drive active weather systems during the winter months, usually is displaced further north across the continental U.S. So we are not getting those winter systems per se more frequently as we typically do doing neutral or El Nino conditions. It's displaced further north. But the good news is going forward as we get into spring is that the rainfall pattern is going to become more favorable for the state as we get more toward the neutral conditions. So by the March, April, May timeframe, which is what these graphics show, the image on the right shows precipitation going back to more normal or a non-predictable if it's going to be below or above normal, just back to neutral. And it looks like it's going to be hot in Texas, which is not a surprise. And the wildland fire outlook, this was released at the beginning of December. The charts read from right to left. So the January outlook shows a thin sliver over the Florida panhandle and parts of coastal Georgia. And that's directly tied to that drought condition that I showed you earlier on the slide, which had the peninsula or the panhandle, of Florida in a perceptible drought condition. So that just kind of plays forward into January. Notice that as we get into February, it looks like the wildland fire potential could be spreading up along the coastal Carolinas and remaining in the Florida panhandle. And then even into March, kind of the same area with more of an area developing over the Texas, New Mexico area as we get into the spring. So I guess the takeaway on this is that the Florida Peninsula is not outlooked for abnormal wildland fire activity, according to NIFC and Boise, going forward into spring of next year. So that's it for my allocated time. I do have some time, I believe, for a question or two. If somebody has something.
So first, thank you, John. Thank you very much. So how this will work, if you have questions, John will have to repeat the question for the online audience. So first off, does anyone have a question? Raise your hand. Oh, I have a microphone. It's a problem. Hey, anyone? Oh, Dr. Crandall.
Yes, the question is the purple air monitoring system available to the members of the public? And yes, it is. If you, I don't know the website offhand, but if you go to Google and just type in purple air, it'll bring up their main site. And since it is a crowdsourced based system, there's no restrictions on the monitoring information. So yeah, that can be surveilled in real time.
Excellent question. Anybody else? Way in the back. Yeah.
I don't know offhand, but it's in the couple $100 range, I believe. But if you go to the website, they have all the information there, Purple Air, where you can purchase the sensor on that site.
We have an online question. Go ahead. Oh, Chris.
Yeah, on that regards too, are there like instructional standards that people follow when they install that thing, so they're not like just download it?
Yeah, so the question is there instructional material that are included with the sensor? And yeah, yes, there is instructional material as far as the sighting locations that are recommended, as far as maintenance of the system and things like that. But there is some QC involved also. There is some QC on the national website that if something is showing up really crazy, there may be some filtering of it to prevent it from showing up.
All right, now let's go to our online folks. Yes.
For the drought in the panhandle, is that driven by the hurricanes kind of sucking moisture kind of away from them, or is that just?
Question is the drought in the panhandle. The drought in the panhandle was not related to the hurricane or lack of hurricane. That was just the lack of weather systems that were impacting from the west, from the storm tracks in the period of time leading up to that.
Go ahead.
Mass specifically, you're talking about the size of particles, but what about like N95 mask, other kind of breathing devices?
Okay, yeah, the question is cloth masks versus N95 masks. I don't profess to be an expert in masks, but from what I understand, as far as the N95, it's not designed for long-term operational use in a firefighter setting. It's basically too uncomfortable to be able to wear in an operational setting for long periods of time, outdoors especially.
Anyone else have a question in the audience here? Raise your hand if you have. Vic?
Do you feel the Christmas weekend cold frontal passage will produce widespread freeze down Lake O?
The question is a freeze going to happen down to Lake Okeechobee? And that's not something I can really look at right now. I didn't look at the long-term forecast, to be honest. I was dealing with a tornado watch yesterday at my office, and I was the short-term person just dealing with that. So stay tuned to the forecast, though, for folks in Central Florida, that this could be a significant cold episode, maybe the coolest one we've had this season. So just stay tuned. We have some time to prep for it.
Hey, Ben, any other questions? So, Sammy, how are we on time? All right. So, in that case, if there's no other questions, I'd like to give John a big hand and all the